journey through forgotten worlds, where ancient nomadic women of the Eurasian steppes shaped survival with strength and wisdom. Discover the powerful desert matrons of Nabataea, who ruled trade, water, and family in the unforgiving sands. Walk alongside the Baltic forest women, healers and spirit keepers, who lived in harmony with nature's secrets. Feel the resilience of the salt wives of the Sahara, guardians of caravans and sacred water in the vast desert. Sail with the sea daughters of the Aegean, whose hands crafted civilization from waves, wind, and fire. Experience untold stories of courage, care, and creativity from women overlooked by history. Uncover ancient rituals, timeless songs, and enduring legacies woven into the fabric of humanity. This immersive tale reveals the invisible architects of early societies and the silent power behind survival. Perfect for calm storytelling, it invites you to relax, learn, and drift peacefully to sleep. Let this journey through time and space illuminate the vital role of women in shaping our shared past. Story title: What Did Ancient Nomadic Women Do All Day? And Other Forgotten Stories from Early Civilizations, Part 1. Nomadic Mothers of the Wind. The invisible women of the Eurasian steppes and the wind-swept grasslands that stretch endlessly from the borders of Eastern Europe to the farthest edge of Mongolia. Life was born not in cities, but in movement. The ancient Eurasian steppes, home to the Scythians, Sarmatians, early Mongols, and countless other tribes, were not ruled by kings and palaces, but by horses, tents, and sky. Among the great tales of male warriors and horseback raiders, there existed another world, a world of nomadic women who were the true rhythm keepers of tribal life. They didn't wield swords in every story, though some did, but more often, they wove the fabric of daily survival with hands that stitched, nursed, taught, and guided. At dawn, before the men had even unsaddled their horses from last night's scout, the women would be up-wrapping themselves in furs, stepping out of their felt-covered yurts, and stepping into the daily ballet of tasks that sustained their people. The smell of smoke and mare's milk would mingle in the crisp morning air. The fire had to be tended always. Its embers carried heat from one dawn to the next. Fire was sacred. It was never allowed to die. One woman would feed it, carefully placing dung cakes or branches beneath the pot of millet porridge, while another spun wool beside her with weathered fingers that had known winter and war. Children, half asleep, wandered out of the yurt, rubbing their eyes. Some would be bathed in warmed goat milk. Others would be taught how to sew, how to braid hair, how to harness the small horses that grazed not far away. There was no idle time. Every moment served survival. Every woman was teacher, healer, cook, mother, craftsman, midwife, spiritual guide, and occasionally warrior. In some Scythian and Sarmatian societies, women were trained to shoot arrows from horseback. They didn't merely defend, they traveled, hunted, and even led. Archaeologists would centuries later uncover tombs of noble women buried with armor and swords, their bodies scarred in ways only battle can mark, yet most remained in the sacred sphere of the hearth. Inside the yurt, layered with woolen rugs and animal hides, the women kept stories alive. Oral tradition was their library. Songs passed from mother to daughter explained the stars, the spirits of the wind, and the tragic love stories of hunters who chased too far beyond the mountains. Food was survival. Women milked the horses, churned butter in goatskin bags, fermented mare's milk into kumis sharp and strong. They baked flatbreads on iron plates and preserved dried meat for the winter. They were also the doctors, using plants gathered during the long migrations, wormwood, garlic, fermented mushrooms. They healed wounds, treated illness, and eased childbirth with stone tools and whispered prayers. Their social world was vast. Women gathered together to mourn, to marry, to chant. Their laughter echoed across the plains during festivals. They painted their faces with ochre, adorned themselves with beads, and sometimes when times were truly good wove golden thread into their clothing, and yet their world was always on the move. The winds never let them rest for long. A new camp was chosen. Tents were dismantled in an hour. Children mounted on goats or ponies. The fire was carried in a leather jar, still glowing, and onward they moved, the women walking or riding beside, the caravan not behind it. To understand these nomadic women is to understand the engine of ancient survival, not the sharpness of swords, but the constancy of care. They made warriors. They made warmth. They made life. Asterisk, 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 Part 2. The Desert Matrons of Nabataea, guardians of sand, water, and trade in the deep deserts of what we now call Jordan, carved into red sandstone cliffs and hidden within the craggy canyons of Petra, lived a civilization built not just on stone, but on silence, wisdom, and water. The Nabataeans, masters of the desert, created a city that glowed like embers at sunset. Their merchants crossed the Arabian sands with spices, perfumes, and silk. But behind these caravans and temples stood a quieter forcewoman who ruled homes, guided families, and ran markets in a way that surprised even Roman observers. To understand the women of Nabataea is to walk not in the footprints of queens, but in the shadow of traders, midwives, artisans, and spiritual keepers of balance. They lived in stone-cut homes where incense curled through the air and prayer was whispered in ancient tongues. At dawn, women swept the thresholds of their cave dwellings while others walked silently to cisterns, drawing water as if it were sacred wine. And it was sacred because in Nabataea, water meant survival. Unlike most ancient societies, Nabataean women had legal rights. They owned property. They signed contracts. They appeared in court. Their names are etched into tombs, alongside their husbands not beneath them. Some scholars believe Nabataean society offered women more equality than even later Roman rule did. In Petra's bustling markets, women sold goods alongside men. They bartered for frankincense, saffron, myrrh, and dyed fabrics that had traveled from India and beyond. Their voices were calm but firm. Traders respected them, pilgrims watched them, and their own children looked up at them with awe, for mothers weren't just caretakers, they were leaders. The daily life of a Nabataean woman began before sunrise. First, she would tend to the family shrine lighting oil lamps, leaving dried dates or crushed cardamom as offerings to the gods of the home. Some women were deeply spiritual, acting as intermediaries during rituals or festivals. Others practiced healing arts, burning herbs to treat respiratory issues, creating poultices from desert plants for burns and wounds, or using rosewater to cleanse the body during illness. Food preparation was an intricate ritual of gratitude and balance. Bread was baked in domed clay ovens. Dates were boiled into syrup. Meat, often scarce, was slow-cooked with lentils and herbs in stone pots. Women managed granaries, monitored water rations, and planned meals around the flow of caravans, for they knew when goods would arrive and when famine threatened. Marriage in Nabataea was a practical and often respectful arrangement. Women had a voice in whom they wed. They were not seen as property, but as partners trusted with managing households, trade operations, and inheritance. Widows, unlike in many ancient cultures, could keep their husband's land and remarry without stigma. Childbirth was sacred and surrounded by layers of ritual. Elder women would anoint the mother with oils, chant ancient hymns, and bury the placenta under carefully chosen stones. Infants were swaddled with symbols of protection sewn into their cloth. Mothers didn't simply raise children, they taught them songs, desert navigation, and the meaning of stars. Older women carried great honor. They were not discarded by age, but revered. Their advice could sway trade decisions. Their knowledge of ancient water routes and weather patterns was irreplaceable. They knew when a wind was coming just by the taste of the air and in the quietest Hours beneath the desert moon, the women would gather, in courtyards, on rooftops, or in the warm belly of sandstone homes. They'd tell stories, myths of ancient serpents that guarded springs, tales of lovers lost in sandstorms, legends of warrior women who tamed lions and rode camels like kings. These weren't just bedtime tales. They were history, wrapped in metaphor and memory. Visitors from Greece and Rome often marveled at Nabataea's wealth and architecture, but what they didn't always notice was the powerful presence of women running much of that society from behind veils and within shaded doorways. As Roman conquest crept eastward, and as Petra slowly fell into shadow over centuries, the names of many Nabataean women faded, but their impact, their dignity, and their strength remain carved into the cliffs if you know where to look. For these were the matrons of the desert. They didn't ride to war or rule from thrones. They ruled from behind water jars, incense, burners, and scrolls of wisdom, and, through them, Petra bloomed from dust. Asterisk. Part 3. Forest women of the Baltics, healers, spirits, and silent power. Long before the Baltic lands were carved into kingdoms, and before the old gods were drowned beneath foreign crosses, dense forests covered the earth like a green ocean. From Estonia to Lithuania, trees ruled the land. Pines whispered secrets. Rivers shimmered with ancient memory. And deep in this world, untouched by stone cities and untouched by time-lived women, whose lives were inseparable from the forest itself. These women were not queens or warriors in shining armor. They were weavers of moss and moonlight. They lived in wooden cabins that smelled of juniper and smoke. They sang to trees and healed with mushrooms. In their world, the divine was not above, but all around, in the breath of a lynx, in the dew on bark, in the smoke rising from an iron pot to the outside world. These forest women seemed simple, but among their people, they were revered. They rose before dawn, to gather the day's herbs not carelessly, but in ceremony. A plant was not touched until spoken to. A root was not pulled unless the moon agreed. They carried woven baskets with sprigs of yarrow, chamomile, birch bark, and lady's mantle. Each had a purpose. Some healed pain, others brought visions, and a few whispered. Only by the oldest women could open the door between worlds. Their homes were not silent. Inside, children learned the old songs while stirring porridge made from rye and berries. Chickens clucked outside. A cat napped in the smoke-stained rafters. Women spun wool and flax while humming lullabies layered with ancient stories. Men often hunted or carved tools, but it was the women who tracked the soul of the land. They knew when the rains would come by the patterns of bird migration. They could predict illness from the color of morning mist. They spoke in symbols and runes, carved onto birch scrolls, or stones set in quiet patterns on the floor. Marriage was not always a church affair. In pre-Christian Baltic tribes, weddings were tied to solstices and river rites. A girl became a woman when she wore the wreath of flowers that crowned her during the midsummer ritual. Her hair was braided with herbs wormwood to keep away evil, clover for luck, nettle for strength. The ceremony took place not in a temple, but in a grove, under ancient oaks that had seen generations come and go. The forest women were also guardians of death. When someone passed, it was they who washed the body, wrapped it in linen, and guided the soul through fire and incense. They sang the death songs, long, melodic chants that told the story of the departed and guided them across the veil. The dead were never feared. They lived on in rivers, trees, and birds. Sometimes, the women left honey or bread on stumps, whispering thanks to grandmothers long gone. Their knowledge passed not through books, but from lip to ear, hand to hand. A grandmother would take her granddaughter into the woods and point, "This one for fever, that one for childbirth. This one you never touch, not even in winter." Lessons were stories. Recipes were poems. And though they were not warriors, the women defended their traditions with silent strength. When Christianity arrived with sword and scripture, The forest women did not protest openly, but they continued to bless water, whisper to fire, and dance barefoot during the equinox. Even centuries later, when they were called witches by frightened outsiders, many of them stood firm. They were not spellcasters with wands, but memory keepers of a world older than kingdoms. They held the knowledge of bees, of lichen, of spirits who lived beneath stones. And when night fell over the Baltic forests, and the fog rolled low through the trees, their silhouettes could be seen walking among the birches carrying baskets of herbs, a lantern, and a song. These women did not leave behind empires, but they left behind stories etched into bark, dreams cradled in rivers, and generations shaped by the rhythm of earth and sky. Part 4. The Salt Wives of the Sahara, Women of Wind, Trade, and Survival far beyond the reach of rivers and farmlands. Beyond even the grassy Sahel, stretches a landscape so harsh and luminous it seems like another planet, the Sahara. It is not lifeless, as some might believe, but alive, with stories written in sand and salt. For centuries, caravans moved like shadows across this desert, transporting gold, ivory, and salt. And within the wind-swept tents of the Tuareg, the Moors, and the Songhai lived women whose strength was carved from silence, sunlight, and endurance. They were known not by titles or monuments, but by their role in a world that depended entirely on them. The Salt Wives, the women who managed trade, settlements, families, water rations, spiritual life, and the endurance of their people while the men traveled across the desert. The desert is not a place where you can waste time. Every morning had to be precise. The women would rise before the heat, their faces already veiled in indigo cloth. Veiling was a matter of sand and sun, not subjugation. In fact, among many Tuareg communities, women held higher status than men. Property passed through the female line. A woman could divorce a man by simply moving her belongings to another tent. Songs were composed in their honor, and the best poets were often women. They began the day with fire-tiny flames kindled with care, used to brew mint tea that would later be poured with ceremony into narrow glasses. This was not just a drink. It was a signal of readiness, of connection, and of calm before the heat thickened the air. Their homes were made of woven palm mats stretched over wooden frames. Every item inside a bowl, a lamp, a fabric had a story. Women did not just use tools, they crafted them. They wove baskets from desert reeds, embroidered shawls with symbols of water and wind, dyed cloth with indigo until it stained their fingers blue like night dot. In places like Tagaza and Taudani, where salt mining was brutal, women waited in oasis settlements. Men would leave for weeks at a time, crossing 1,000 miles of dunes with camel trains. During that absence, the women weren't just caretakers. They were the economy. They traded in local markets selling dates, dried fish, woven goods, and livestock. They bartered not just for survival, but for influence. They tracked prices. They knew every family's debt. A salt wife knew when the next caravan was due, not by calendar, but by instinct, counting stars, changes in wind, and the moods of animals. Water was their true gold. Every drop had to be stored, filtered, guarded. A woman would walk half a day to find a shallow well and carry its treasure back in clay jars on her back. She shared it not only with her children, but with her neighbors, for in the desert, generosity meant survival. And they were healers, too. Using desert herbs, camel milk, and sacred rituals, they treated fevers and burns. For childbirth, women gathered in the privacy of tents, forming a circle of whispers, songs, and prayers. The desert could not afford loud pain, but it listened to soft courage. Raising children in the Sahara required more than protection, it required preparing them to remember. Girls were taught the old tongue, the songs of migration, the tribal symbols. Boys were told stories of ancestors not from books, but from the rhythm of poetry shared beneath stars. When men returned from the salt routes, tanned and gaunt from the journey. It was the women who received them not with submission, but with honor and discipline. If a man had failed to bring enough, or had mismanaged trade, he would answer to his wife. A strong salt wife held the respect of the tribe. Her word could sway clan meetings. Her silence could speak louder than argument. Religion and spirits walked side by side with them. Some women served as seers interpreting dreams, casting protective charms against jinn, reading meaning in the lines of sand left by snakes or beetles. Night was their temple. The moon, their witness. They prayed not only to God but to the winds that had kept them alive. They wore their lives on their bodies, bracelets of hammered silver that jingled with movement, tattoos etched into the skin of their hands, cheeks, or foreheads. Not decoration-identity. And always, there was song. The women sang while pounding grain. They sang as they walked across salt flats. They sang to remember the names of those who had vanished in sandstorms. Their voices echoed through dunes that forget almost everything but not song. Their lives were not easy. They lost children. They fought drought. They buried friends under unmarked stones. But they endured not as victims, not as shadows behind men, but as the pillars of desert life. In the modern world, their names are barely known. But in the Sahara, the memory of the salt wives remains in every water jar, every indigo veil, every song whispered to the night. They were the keepers of balance between sand and spirit, between trade and tenderness, and through them, the desert breathed. Part 5. The Sea Daughters of the Aegean Women, Waves, and the Birth of Civilization, where the blue sea kisses jagged cliffs, and where the sun dances on the whitewashed walls of ancient villages. The story of the Aegean Sea is one of mystery, trade, and beginnings. Long before empires rose and fell, before marble temples and epic wars, the women of the Aegean Islands shaped history with their hands, voices, and courage. These were the sea daughters, keepers of boats, storytellers of the tides, and midwives of civilization. Life on these rocky isles was shaped by the sea's breath, calm and violent, generous and cruel. For the women who lived here, the ocean was not a barrier, but a pathway. Their days were rhythms of salt and sun, fish and fire. At dawn, the smell of brine and wood smoke filled the air. Women carried baskets filled with olives, figs, and barley to the market squares, while fishermen prepared their nets. They wove baskets from reeds gathered on the shore and mended sails torn by storms. Their hands knew the art of pottery, crafting vessels that would hold wine, oil, and water for centuries. In homes built of stone, women stirred fragrant stews flavored with wild herbs and sea salt. Children played at their feet, learning songs about the sea gods, about odysseys, and about heroes born from islands long vanished beneath waves. But these women did not just maintain households. They controlled trade routes, negotiating the exchange of goods between mainland and island, between north and south. They managed olive groves, vineyards, and salt pans. Their knowledge passed down through generations. Midwifery was a sacred trust. Women gathered to assist births, whispering ancient blessings to mother and child. They understood the phases of the moon, the tides, and the cycles of life and death. Religion flowed through their veins. Temples dedicated to goddesses like Artemis and Aphrodite were cared for by women who led rituals, dances, and offerings. They believed in the power of the sea, the mystery of the moon, and the strength of the earth beneath their feet. Storytelling was their inheritance and gift. In the evenings, by firelight, women recited epic tales of gods who shaped the winds, of heroes who sailed to unknown lands, of love and loss, courage and cunning. These stories were not only entertainment, but instruction, memory, and identity. In times of danger, when pirates threatened or storms raged, the women organized defenses, signaling with smoke and lights. Though men often left on voyages, women kept communities alive, their resilience anchoring the future. Their lives were marked by cycles, planting and harvest, voyage and return, birth and death. They wore simple clothes dyed with indigo and ochre, necklaces made of shells and stones polished by the sea. Though their names rarely grace history books, the legacy of the sea daughters lives on in the waves that lap ancient shores, in the songs hummed by fishermen, and the sturdy boats that still sail the Aegean blue. They were the soul of early civilization, patient, fierce, nurturing, and eternal. Epilogue: reflections on forgotten women through the nomadic steppes, the desert sands, the Baltic forests, and the Aegean waves. Women have shaped the course of human history, not always in ways written by conquerors or kings, but quietly, persistently, and with enduring strength. Their stories remind us that history is more than battles and dates. It is the lived experience of survival, love, creativity, and care. May these tales rest gently on your mind tonight, carrying you through dreams of vast plains, golden deserts, whispering woods endless seasoned, the women who made them home. Good night.